So today we're going to be talking about leading up, down, and across as a faculty member. So I'm going to start with a couple leadership principles, then I'll get to the learning objectives for the session. One is that leadership development is self-development, and who you are as a leader is really built upon who you are as a person. So outstanding leadership is built upon a foundation of self-awareness, right? So your story of your life so far, your values, your purpose, your capabilities. And the other thing that I want to get across here as we're talking about leading up, down, and across is that the most effective leadership is not positional, right? It's not really about power, but it's relational. It's about influence. So you can lead from wherever you are because you can influence from wherever you are. And one definition of influence is the capacity to have an effect on the character development or behavior of someone or something. Some of the fundamentals of influence, which we'll be talking about today, are self-awareness and empathetic listening and building trusting relationships. Something that I just come back to time and time again is this quotation that I can't actually remember where I saw it, but the more you give power away, the more powerful and influential you become. So here's a great illustration of power versus influence. And you can all appreciate who is the more effective leader. So what about leading from the middle? So the reason I like to give this talk that in academic health centers, as faculty members, we're always leading from the middle, right? We're embedded in these very complex systems. The clinical and research and educational systems are increasingly interdependent. And as I'm sure you've noticed, we don't often control the resources that we need to accomplish our goals, right? And the better that we are at leading from the middle, the more influence we're going to have, the better leaders will be, and the more likely we are to meet our own goals. So during this talk, I'm hoping that you can reflect upon who you are leading, identify some key strategies for leading from the middle, and I'm going to present strategies to you which you will notice really overlap in terms of whether they apply to leading up, down, or across, but I've grouped them in areas where I think they're most relevant. I'm going to very briefly introduce you to some of my favorite leadership frameworks and resources for further exploration and reading. And then we're going to spend a little bit of time creating an action plan for you to implement some of the strategies that you're learning about in your leadership and for deeper exploration and learning. So we're going to start with a reflection. I'm going to give you about 3 or 4 minutes to do this. You should have the handout that Krista sent out before the session. This is a reflection about who you're leading. So if you can jot down 1 or 2 or 3 of your managers, some of your colleagues who you might be leading across to, and then if you have direct reports, or even if they're not direct reports, maybe mentees or students or others who look up to you as a leader. Everyone have a chance to jot down some folks? I see some faces looking up, so we'll go ahead and move on. You can keep adding to it as we go along. So I'm going to start with leading up, okay? So remember, and even if you think that you can't lead up, remember the power versus influence dichotomy and that effective leadership is relational. So you really can be very effective leading up. Leading up usually refers to effectively managing the relationship with whoever you report up to, with your boss, and enhancing your boss's work and helping them to achieve their objectives through your own performance and then going above and beyond the tasks that are assigned to you. If you're effective at leading up, this positions you to be a valuable and indispensable asset to your boss and to the organization. It leads to improvements in your own productivity and your team's productivity and functioning, and it will, for sure, bring opportunities and career advancement to you. The key principle underlying leading up is empathic understanding. So what do I mean by that? So some of the principles of empathic understanding are understanding that your boss is really busy. If you get 100 emails, they might get 200 or 300 emails, right? They have multiple responsibilities, and they're still trying to balance their life as you are, right? This year, it's been especially challenging, of course, for everyone. Another strategy for empathic understanding is viewing issues from 2 levels up. This is something like I did not start thinking about this till I was well into my mid-level faculty career, where I started to finally realize that my boss reports to someone else, right? And they have expectations for my boss, right? And they have incentives for my boss. And it will just open up a world of understanding for you if you start thinking about who they're accountable to and what they're accountable for. And then another strategy is learning to understand your boss's values and priorities and work styles, right? What motivates her? What are her goals and priorities at different levels? How does she process information and make decisions? What's her work style? What are her communication preferences? And these are things that you can observe or you can ask about directly, right? Some strategies for leading up are, first of all, the most important thing I think is communication, right? And communication that's very clear, that's simple, and that is concise and parsimonious, right? Long emails, long emotional emails are the bane of many leaders' existence. So try to keep those emails short and straightforward and infrequent. If it's something complex, then set up a meeting. If you can avoid CCing and blind copying and FYIing your leaders, people you report to, they will greatly appreciate that. I know there's a temptation sometimes to send an email with every idea or thought that you have, and that leads to multiple emails a day. But if you think about, some leaders have, who you report to may have 50 direct reports. So if they're getting multiple emails a day from several of those folks, it can become overwhelming. So if you can combine requests or save them for meetings, that's really helpful. Communication through executive summaries when you're turning in reports is really helpful. And a rule of thumb is the higher level the leader is, the shorter the executive summary should be. So if you're sending an executive summary to your CEO, maybe a half a page or a page at most. That's probably all they're going to read. If your bosses who are busy often will throw out an idea or directive to you, and it won't have quite enough. They won't have the opportunity to sort of think through it first. So sometimes you really need to come back to them and ask for specific deadlines. Let them know about your capacity, which they may have no idea about what your capacity is at that moment. Identify what resources you need to take care of that. Clarify objectives and deadlines and things like that. That can be super helpful and avoid misaligned expectations. If you can possibly align your interactions with knowledge of those expectations of your boss and their incentives and their values, priorities, and work style, that can be really helpful. So as you go into each meeting, just think about that. Like, is my agenda aligned with, or is the way I'm going to present this aligned with? That can be super helpful in terms of managing up. And then considering what truths your boss needs to know, right? The higher up you are in a leadership position, the less honest feedback you're going to get, right? Now, this doesn't mean sort of gossiping and bringing all kinds of issues to your boss frequently, but you do know what's happening on the front lines. And so if there is a serious concern that you think your boss is not aware of, it is really important and valuable to do that and to speak truth to power. Some other strategies, there are going to be times, of course, you disagree with your boss, but there are ways of disagreeing productively and respectfully, right? Aligning around your common goals, like saying, I know our common goal here is X, and this is how we can get there. If you can't accomplish what they've asked, providing a range of different options, and then, just staying based in facts and keeping emotions in check. One thing that is really hard to do sometimes, to remember to do, is acknowledging your boss's value and importance. I think that all of us have this bias that we've gotten where we are on our own merits, right? And sometimes we forget just how important our mentors are to us, or our supervisors are to us. So publicly acknowledging contributions is really, really helpful. Also, asking for advice and feedback is a way of demonstrating that you value your boss's opinions and then being patient. Often when you have a new leader, you expect to develop understanding and trust immediately, but it does take time and relationship building. So be patient. So we're going to take about 5 minutes to reflect. Pick one of those people that you lead up to and then consider from those strategies that I presented to you what you would want to use. Like if you could start using one of those strategies as you walk out here today, not walk, but as you transition to your next Zoom meeting, what would you want to use? What competencies might you want to develop? And again, we won't be discussing with partners because of the limited time, but we'll discuss these at the end. So just take a few minutes to do that, and then we'll move on. All right, well, we'll go ahead and move on, and then feel free to keep jotting those strategies down as we move along. So now I'm going to move on to leading down, and I'm going to talk about 4 key principles to leading down. One, we're going to talk again about that concept that leadership development is self-development. We'll also talk about building your leadership confidence, leading by enabling meaning, autonomy, and purpose, and learning how to have difficult conversations. So this is a book that we use in our core leadership program at Cincinnati Children's called Discovering Your True North. And I'm going to talk about 4 concepts underlying the principle that leadership development is self-development. So first, it's the concept that when you're a leader, it is extremely helpful to think about and be able to frame and tell your life story, including crucibles, which are those moments, those events in your life that were challenging and that sort of formed you into the person that you are today. Exploring your life story really helps to reveal your authentic self to you, and that allows you to reveal it to those you lead. And it is extremely helpful in helping you to define your leadership passion and purpose. The people you lead really don't want you to check your personal life at the door. They want to know who you are and what you stand for. So this is just an example of my own, like a very, very brief abbreviated version of kind of my own exploration of my life story. So I'm the child and grandchild of Holocaust survivors. I grew up in Alabama during the Civil Rights Movement, and that has impacted my leadership in that I have a passion for social justice and equality and inclusion that I bring to my leadership. I also have had the good fortune of having wonderful mentors and sponsors and family and friends who help support me and lift me up and get me through challenging times. And that's given me some very deep gratitude and a determination to give back and lift up others. And these really have driven my decisions about becoming a division director, becoming an associate chair of academic affairs and career development. Defining values can be very helpful as well. Values really drive your leadership principles. They help to define your ethical boundaries. So when difficult situations come up, which they will, they help you to stay true to those ethical boundaries. And they really prepare you to navigate difficult decisions and crises that will occur during your leadership. So again, just to give you an example, these are my top 4 leadership values, values that drive my leadership: integrity, kindness, inclusiveness, and service. And there are many ways in which you can define your values. The important thing as a leader is really living and operationalizing those values. And if you guys have not read Brené Brown's Dare to Lead, I would highly recommend this book. It's a wonderful leadership book. And she talks about the best way to live your values, right? Which is making sure your intentions and your words and your thoughts and behaviors all align with those values and beliefs. And there's an exercise in her book in which she guides you through choosing your top values and helping you operationalize those into behaviors so that you're living those values, right? When leaders live their values, when they walk the walk of those values, then they're much more effective leaders and more inspirational leaders. Another exercise that I think is really helpful in terms of preparing to lead down is finding the sweet spot of your motivated capabilities. So what Bill George says in True North is that leadership effectiveness is maximized when your motivations and strengths are aligned and you are very clear on the purpose of your leadership. So he provides this this diagram and exercises to help you understand your motivations and capabilities. So motivations are a combination of intrinsic motivations, like I want to improve child health, right? Or I want to train the next generation of learners. Extrinsic motivations would be around like financial security and reputation, that kind of thing. And those form your motivations. And awareness of your strengths and also your expertise and skills inform your capabilities. And where your motivations and capabilities intersect, that's a great place for you to lead. So if you're given an opportunity to lead, you can check to see, is this at the sweet spot of my motivations and my capabilities? And you're more likely to be an effective leader if it is. I also would think about, and this is in True North as well, is creating a personal mission statement that reflects your purpose in life. And a mission statement is typically it's meant to convey a statement of your purpose in life that crosses different domains of your life, right? Your personal and professional domains. This is my own personal mission statement. But again, it just really helps you to focus and helps you to, when you're getting offered opportunities to join different efforts or opportunities to lead, you can try to figure out, is this really aligned with your purpose? And it helps you to prioritize and stay focused. Another concept that's really helpful to think about in terms of leading down is moving from I to we. So in the early years of our faculty positions, we are evaluated and rewarded based on our individual contributions, building research programs, building clinical programs, building educational programs. But outstanding leadership depends entirely upon whether you can make that transition from I to we, right? It's not about people following you. It's about serving people. It's about helping to align them around a common mission and values. It's about empowering them on their own journeys. And it's about motivating them to reach their full potential. So this is a list of, I believe this is from Brene Brown's book, on sort of the difference between I versus we leadership. Right? So it's not about leaders attaining power and position, but serving others. It's not about the belief I need to, or I can do it on my own, but more it takes a team with complementary strengths. It's not about being out in front and asking people to follow you, but more working together to fulfill a shared mission. So these are some interesting things to think about in terms of whether you are on that pathway to moving from I to we leadership. I do love this quotation. I think it encapsulates we leadership. It's from Kouzes and Posner from their book, A Leader's Legacy, which is a quick read and a really great book also. And they say what people say about you will not be about what you achieved for yourself, but what you achieved for others, and not how big a campfire you built, but how well you kept others warm, how well you illuminated the night to make them feel safe, and how beautiful you left the campsite for those who would come after you to build the next fire. The second concept I wanted to talk to you about in terms of leading down is building your leadership confidence, right? We all have imposter syndrome, right? We move into new positions and we think, I can't do this. How can I do this? But confidence is really important to great leadership. It's built upon self-awareness, of your strengths so that you appreciate your strengths, but also your weaknesses so you can work on improving those. A commitment to continuous learning about leadership and building skills, because none of us are perfect, and great leadership is all about continuous learning and improvement. Having mentors and a support team, not just to build your confidence, but to give you feedback, like critical feedback, and then experience and practice, right? Leadership is built upon practice like everything else. You learn leadership skills and then you practice them. And the more you practice them, the more they become second nature to you, like riding a bike, right? And the more confident that you become. So Brene Brown talks about grounded confidence in her book. I really like this approach. She talks about grounded confidence being the messy process of learning and unlearning, practicing and failing, surviving a few misses. It's built upon self-awareness of your strengths and your weaknesses and practice. And she talks about grounded confidence being a combination of what she calls rumble skills, curiosity, and practice. And a rumble is when there's a difficult or challenging situation going on between you and people who you lead, and you have a discussion with them where you commit to be vulnerable and generous and to identifying what the problem is and taking ownership and accountability and then listening with passion. Curiosity is extremely important, right, in leadership and in building confidence. And I know many of us try to race to be the first person in the room with the answer, right? I definitely struggle with this, but I love this quotation from Albert Einstein. If I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about the solutions. And if you translate this to your leadership, you can think about, like, if there's a problem, right, going on and you're having a meeting with your team, how can you spend a sufficient amount of time thinking about and identifying what the problem is, because often we're moving to solutions before we really understand what the problem is. And these are some good Rumble starters. I love these. I try really hard to use these. Don't use them enough, but they're just great. The ones I like the most are, I'm curious about, or tell me more, or I love the one at the end, what problem are we trying to solve, right? So these are great to incorporate into your leadership. The next concept is leading by enabling mastery, autonomy, and purpose. And this is based on a book by Daniel Pink called Drive, in which he talks about the 3 key drivers of motivation. And as you are leading people, it's really helpful to think, am I tapping into these 3 key leaders of motivation for the people who report to me? So one is mastery, the ability to build skills. So am I giving those who report to me opportunities for development and ability to master? Secondly, autonomy, the desire to be self-directed. Am I empowering my people to make their own decisions? And third, purpose, the desire to do meaningful and important work. So as a leader, one of my favorite things to do is strategic planning, and to have fully engaged strategic planning where no matter what the size of your team, you include every single person on your team in that strategic planning. So it's their strategic plan, not your strategic plan, right? And as you're doing that, you can surface people's individual passions and strengths, and it really helps to align around a common vision. The only thing that I would add to this trifecta is connection. I think it is really, really important to foster connection. And that is also an equally important motivator if people are connected to others at work. And finally, learning how to have difficult conversations. So there are many frameworks for difficult conversations. The Crucial Conversations framework is a really helpful one, but there are many. But if you learn how to have difficult conversations as a leader, it helps you to ensure that there's clarity about people's responsibilities and accountability. It helps you define expectations. It helps maintain high performance, and it really builds trust, because nothing erodes trust like leaders not holding people accountable, right? I know you've probably all experienced that. And then it improves resilience and vitality, right? If you're able to lean into and be good at having difficult conversations, you're going to be a lot less burned out, right? And a lot less drained. Okay, so we're going to move to our next reflection on leading down. So I want you to think about a person who you lead down to, or people you lead down to, and think about, based on those strategies that we just talked about, thinking about what strategies you might want to use or competencies you might want to develop. So let's take about 3 to 5 minutes to reflect and jot down some ideas. All righty, well, we'll move on, but please feel free to keep jotting down ideas. So we're going to finish up with leading across, and some of the key principles that we'll talk about are emotional and social competencies, building trust, culture and politics, setting boundaries, and listening. So first of all, emotional and social competencies. I think these are super important to outstanding leadership, whether that is up, down, or across. And the key components of developing your emotional and social competencies are seeking feedback and taking time for self-reflection. And that feedback might be one-on-one, it might be through like a formal 360 evaluation, and also pursuing programs that build those competencies. So this is a popular framework for looking at emotional and social competencies, and these have been shown to predict outstanding leadership outcomes. And there are 4 areas: self-awareness, social awareness, self-management, and relationship management. So self-awareness is emotional self-awareness. Self-management includes self-control, a positive outlook, adaptability. Social awareness includes empathy and organizational awareness. And relationship management encompasses conflict management, coaching and mentoring skills, inspirational leadership, working as a team. One of the best ways to assess your emotional and social competencies is through a 360 evaluation. So if you do have the opportunity to do one of those by participating in a program that allows you to do this, I would really, really encourage you to do it. And I think often people feel that these competencies are sort of innate. They're built in, you have them or you don't have them, but that is not true. You can absolutely build these emotional and social competencies. And again, one of the key drivers is being self-aware and seeking out feedback. The second concept I wanted to talk about is building trust. So I like this book called The Thin Book of Trust, which is really thin and you can read it in like an hour tops. Really worth reading. And the definition of trust in this book is choosing to risk making something you value vulnerable to another person's actions, right? I know all of you, as you reflect upon who has been a great leader in your life and who has not, almost always comes back to trust in some way, shape, or form. It's really foundational to leadership, right? So if you trust in your leaders, that is linked to improved communication and innovation, creativity, productivity in the workplace. If you trust people you work with, you assume positive future reciprocity, right? Which leads to willingness to collaborate. And if people believe that their leader is trustworthy and not going to deceive or disadvantage them, that improves the ability of the leader to successfully persuade and influence. And if you remember back to the very beginning of the talk, that great leadership is all about influence, right? You can see how important that is. And it helps people to be comfortable with change. And you're always going to be managing change as a leader, right? You will be new visions to your leadership. And if people trust you, they're more willing to embrace that new vision. And it helps you to inspire and influence and create change. And it is certainly easier to destroy than create. And so building that trust is super important. This is a great framework for building trust that I won't go through, but if you read Brown's book, Dare to Lead, you'll see it. And she gives I think it's 6 or 7 components of how you build trust with your team. Thirdly is deepening understanding of organizational culture and politics. So what is culture? So culture is the set of underlying beliefs and assumptions and values and interactions that contribute to the unique social and psychological environment of every single organization. And they're all different. We have a very particular culture where I work in Cincinnati Children's, and I'm sure there's a very particular culture at UC as well. Peter Drucker has this very famous saying, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And as you start to lead more and more, you'll realize just how accurate that is. Organizational culture is a key driver of engagement and collaboration and conflict resolution, innovation, productivity, burnout. It's key in all of those domains. So how do you effectively engage in the organization's politics? So I would say that one of the most important things is listening. Listening before contributing, seeking to understand before being understood, and asking questions, right? And thinking about, like, if you're in in an organization, what's the stake that everyone has in every outcome? I found this quotation somewhere, and I just love it, that it's better to ask the right question than to have the right answer. Something to think about. There are always people in organizations who seem to really fast track, like straight up the ladder, and so following them and sort of those people are typically people who are really effective in engaging with organizational politics. So following them and getting to know them is helpful. Super important is investing in relationships, building trust, and learning how to connect people, right? And understanding that everybody matters. This is a really important one. I can tell you that I've done a lot of hiring over my career, and I have not hired people multiple times because of what administrative assistants told me about the way that person interacted with them, or the way our like clinical staff, like LPNs and assistants told me about how they interacted. I will not hire someone if someone's not respectful towards every member of our team. So everybody matters. You never know how it's going to work to your advantage if you treat everyone like they matter. And it's the right thing to do, right? In our organizations, in an academic health center, bringing valuable big ideas to the table are going to open doors for you for sure. If you can, and this is not always easy, high ground and upholding everyone's dignity is really, really important. If you can avoid engaging in gossip and staying neutral, that will always advantage you. It is not always easy. I can't say I've always done this, but something that we should aspire to. And I went to one talk on effectively engaging in organizational politics, and the speaker said, think about adding water, not fuel, to the fire when there's a fire. Of course, being aware of your nonverbals, putting on your verbal filter. And then I'm sure all of you are aware of the dangers of sending emotional emails, right? So if you're upset about something, which we all get, right? If you need to write an email and shoot it off to someone, just shoot it off to yourself, right? Send that email to yourself, look at it the next day. You'll be very glad you didn't write it. And if there's an issue that it requires a complex email like that, it's always better to have a conversation with it about it, of course, than write an email. In your life, setting boundaries is going to be really, really important. And one of the best discussions of setting boundaries is in Brene Brown's book, The Gifts of Imperfection. And she defines setting boundaries as making clear what's okay and what's not okay and why. So what does setting boundaries look like? It's saying no to requests that are aligned with our priorities or our purpose, our mission. It's practicing behaviors that respect your time and that of others. I know these items and the bullets here are much easier said than done, and they have gone out the window for many of us during the COVID pandemic, but it's something, again, to strive for. And then holding people accountable for disruptive behaviors, right? So this is what setting boundaries looks like. It's so important to set boundaries for your own, to avoid burnout, right? And to be a great leader, but it's very difficult, right? It requires you to prioritize yourself over the concern about disappointing others. And Brene Brown makes the wonderful point that when we don't set boundaries and when we don't hold people accountable, we get resentful, right? And that drives our burnout and it drives poor relationships with them. So setting boundaries is around choosing to have a difficult conversation in the moment over resentment and burnout in the long run. And finally, listening skills. So I saw this New Yorker cartoon once, and I just laughed out loud because we work in an academic health centers, and this is like so resonates with me, right? Behold, as I guide our conversation to my narrow area of expertise, and certainly I'm guilty of doing this too. If you're interested in building listening skills, which is really, really important to effective leading across, this is a great book that I recommend called You're Not Listening. So in this book, they convey that listening is a foundational skill for every competency in leadership, and everything that we've talked about today is going to be enhanced by good listening. Of course, it's listening is how we engage, we connect, we understand, and we empathize. And Kate Murphy talks about the fact that we spend so much time in our learning in school and in our learning how to talk, right? Learning how to give talks, learning how to speak, learning how to communicate, but how much time is devoted to learning how to listen? Like none, right? Have we ever had a course on how to listen? But it's so important, just interesting. And she talks about these key features to having great listening skills. Genuinely being curious and being attentive when someone's talking to you about what they're saying, suspending judgment, making assumptions and assuming what someone's about to say, and listening actively and holistically. And there's lots and lots of great information about each of these features in her book. So if you're interested in learning more about this, I'd really recommend her book. Okay, so we're going to do one more reflection before we open it up to discussion. So take a few minutes, 3-4 minutes, to pick a person you are leading across to, or people you're leading across to, and think about what strategies that we just talked about you want to use, or what competencies you want to develop in the coming weeks. All right, so hopefully you jotted down some strategies. I just have one more slide and then we'll open it up for discussion. So just to go back to our learning objectives today, hopefully you've been able to reflect upon some of the people you're leading up, down, and across to, and you've been able to identify some strategies. You've started to create that action plan for implementing those strategies in your leadership. And you can explore some of those leadership resources for areas that you're curious in.